I will now be able to hand over to my colleague Simon Catan. So Simon is the Director of Undergraduate Studies at Department of Computing, Goldsmiths, University of London. And for that, in that role, he's had a responsibility for leading his department through the challenges of the previous year. And but Simon is also, has a long and fantastic history of educational innovation and the use of technology and innovation, with many examples. My favorite being an Alice in Wonderland themed live immersive adventure game in order to teach the Unix command line, which has to be one of the driest subjects in computing. So, some fantastic educational experiences that fed into his experiences last year. So I'd now like to, if we can hand over to Simon and to take it away about the experiences of Goldsmiths computing over the last year.
Simon,
okay, thanks, Marco. I just want to check is my screen shared as well, just before I get.
If you could just share your screen again, Simon.
Okay, I need to share my screen again. Okay. Yeah, so just to kind of thanks for that introduction, Marco. Just to kind of fill in a little bit more on the context as well. I'm Director of Undergraduate Studies in the Department of Computing at Goldsmiths. We have around in the region of about 900 students with us, and the bulk of those are undergraduate students, and we have quite a range of courses as well. I think probably most people here are kind of familiar now with this timeline, but I'll kind of talk for it a bit. So yes, this time last year we were none the wiser, happily delivering our teaching on campus as per normal. And then, of course, around March, COVID hit the UK, and we had a rapid turnaround to online teaching. And we did our best to make it through to the end of the academic year. And then we had a kind of welcome break, but also a period of planning and reflection. And we embarked on a really quite different approach to teaching in the following term. So I talk a little bit in more detail about what was happening that already set us up quite well for a rapid change to the online environment. So some things that we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years in computing that set us up well. We do a lot of what I call micro assessment. So we have continuous assessments that run throughout the course of a module. Things like in-class quizzes or auto-graded assessment, or assessment that has clickable rubrics that's very fast to mark. We use these in our undergraduate classes, and it means that the students are getting feedback on summative assessments all the time whilst they're studying. What this also means is that we've got some very rich data about our students, which allows us to deal with low levels of engagement early on. So that's one part that set us up quite well. We also run on many of our modules a flipped classroom model, a lot of which means that our students are learning via video, but then coming into class for feedback and interactive sessions where they actually work on their assignments. And this was also supported by our work with University of London on our online degree. So we were able to use some of the materials from that to support flipped classroom. So this was another thing you can kind of see that obviously that this is going to help us if we have to rapidly pivot online. Yeah, so then the thing happened, and we had to rapidly switch to online teaching. I think the biggest problem that we faced was that we weren't set up with a suitable video platform, and so there was for real-time teaching. So there was a scrabble to find a tool that would work for us, and we started out with an open source tool called Big Blue Button. So that's what we were using. There were lots of kind of improvised approaches to trying to do breakout rooms or multiple streams of learning. So people were setting up Skype calls on the side and various kind of workarounds. We had to do a huge pivot to get what were previously handwritten exams into an online format, because we knew that we wouldn't be able to bring the students into an exam hall. We also had to reassure our students. So we found ourselves doing a lot more messaging to our students, things like all student Q&A sessions on Zoom calls. And also amongst ourselves, we found ourselves challenged to work with each other, I mean the staff, and collaborate together. So all of these presented some pretty big challenges for us. So we kind of got through to the end of the year, and I think we were quite, as a body of staff, we were quite surprised that how well we did manage to do that. And then over the summer, we kind of tried to plan to kind of deliver something that was a bit more robust in terms of its academic level, and something that was a bit more engaging for our students as well. So we did a student consultations to find out what the students had felt about our efforts at online teaching. We designed a new teaching structure around that. We did a lot of training and work with MS Teams to get up to scratch on that. We also developed some bespoke tools, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then also subscribe to existing tools such as WooClap, which is a kind of polling software, and Panopto as well. And there was a lot of training of our staff. So that all that business happened over the summer. And then we arrived at this kind of hybrid teaching model that we started from October. And there's a lot of things to say about this, but I'm just sort of going to highlight a few things here. So one of the things is, and I'll talk about a bit more in a bit, is that we found ourselves able to offer lots of extracurricular online events to engage different students. We had to kind of up our game in terms of engagement monitoring and early intervention. We've developed a new open book exams strategy, and we're continuing to iterate on our teaching methods to find ways to create engaging experiences for our students and to get them to engage as well. And just about now, we've also started to reflect on what's happened in this academic year and how much of this practice we want to carry into the next year, because there are many positive things around this as well. So I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of the teaching structure that we settled on. So this is the structure for every undergraduate module. So we have 4 elements. We have lectures which are delivered entirely online, and they normally last around 2 hours, and they're Teams-based lectures. Now, some modules have flipped classroom instead, in which case they're taught through short video tutorials very much in the distance learning style, with things like in-video quizzes, which have summative assessment attached to them as well. So a module either has this method of content delivery or this method. Then we added an extra session, and this was a session to try and increase the amount of interaction that happens. So it was really to focus our students, but also focus our staff on making sure that they are engaging our students, asking them questions, getting the whole class to engage. And we called these sessions review seminars. And to support them, we used this polling software tool called WooClap, which has a really wide variety of quizzes and activities that allow students to engage in fun ways. The final session, and perhaps the most radical one that we added, was called Virtual Contact Time. Now, this session was to replace what we used to call labs. So in a lab, students would turn up, they'd have assignments to be working on, and they'd work at a computer and a long bank of computers, and staff would walk around and support those students kind of in an ad hoc fashion. We found these really, really hard to recreate online. And so we tried to put things together in a different approach. We created a session called Virtual Contact Time, where students could use a platform which I created called Classmates to ask questions, and those questions would go into a kind of a calling queue, and staff would phone back and give one-to-one or small group support to the students. And we made the length of time for these sessions really long, so that it was more like a drop-in session rather than a session that we expected the students to stay at the whole time. So I just give you a quick kind of sort of view of what Classmates, this tool that I created, looks like. So here's kind of a couple of screenshots. You can see that this is a question that a student has asked, and that this little symbol here shows that another student has followed that student's question, which means that when a member of staff calls them back to answer the question, both students will receive the call and they'll get a kind of mini class from the tutor. So this system has, this way of teaching, we've started to iterate on this now. There's a lot of challenges. We found that initially the student engagement was very poor. Very few of them turned up and asked questions. And we did some kind of chasing and some nagging of the students. And then suddenly, as the deadlines approached, it went completely the other way and we got inundated. The system kept crashing and we had far too many students all wanting desperate support on a one-to-one basis. So now starting to kind of follow some approaches. One thing is we're running sort of micro sessions. So, for example, in a session, we'll see that many students ask a similar question and the module leader can create a micro session to deal with that one problem and invite all of those students to it. So an example kind of micro session might be something, one that happened last term, I remember, was my game character won't fall down the canyon. Okay, so that was a specific problem with a specific exercise that they were trying to do, and it's a 15-minute session just to deal with that, and maybe 20 or 30 students turn up to that session online and whilst other activity is going on. So yeah, we're developing this range of techniques to get kind of multiple strands of activity happening within an online session. So yeah, I kind of try and give you a really sort of broad overview of the things that happened so far in our online teaching, and maybe this is fodder for later questions. So I'll just kind of start with the positives, and then I'll do some of the negatives or the things that we want to work on still. So amazingly, I mean, well, I say amazingly, but surprisingly, I should say, we actually received improved student feedback. They actually gave us more positive feedback about our online teaching than our campus teaching. We also got improved access to some of our struggling students. So we found that the ones who engaged with the virtual contact time the most were some of the students with the lowest set of technical skills. So we really got to spend some good time with those students, building their confidence and working on the very specific problems that they have. So that was kind of really reassuring. And I should say, yeah, also that our interactions with the students, we had more time to interact with them. It was more less rushed because we weren't in a very busy lab environment and with other students asking us questions. So we got to do some really good work there. And it seems like we're seeing some of that within our retention figures for this year, although it's still early days to be sure of that. As I said, the virtual contact time, we started with very poor engagement, but we did manage to build it. I've thrown a negative in there, but I'll come back to that one. So the students were definitely, our teaching was able to become much more responsive. So we found ourselves throwing together more ad hoc sessions and extracurricular sessions to deal with particular problems. I think that's quite an interesting opportunity of online teaching in this manner. The students were very positive about their online exams and definitely preferred them to the handwritten exam experience, as did most of our staff as well. So yeah, some of the negatives, students were, it's interesting, students complained about the lack of social learning opportunities, and we're definitely trying to work on that right now. But at the same time, for example, staff have found across the board that when they create breakout rooms, that students are often silent in them and that they're unwilling to talk. Similarly, many students are resistant to engaging in team sessions, in lectures and so on. But also, kind of conversely, when the chat does get busy in a team session, that's a very, very difficult thing to manage because it runs so fast as you're talking, and it puts, you know, very heavy demands on you in terms of, as a teacher, in terms of multitasking. What other things can I say before I kind of round up here? Yeah, there was certainly there are a lot of students who were very challenged by using the technology and maybe didn't have the appropriate technology. There's some serious issues to be dealt with in terms of accessibility, poor Wi-Fi connections, things like that. The other things I would say is there's a real tension between synchronous and asynchronous learning. So on the one hand, students want the convenience of asynchronous learning, but they want the interaction of synchronous learning. So what they tend to do is kind of make quite unboundaried requests for continual 24/7 synchronous learning, which obviously we can't deliver. So there has been some work around managing student expectations in this new environment for them. Also, I think we've experienced a lot of student complaints about the amount of work, which is surprising for us because we actually reduced the amount of work in many modules that we expected of students in response to, you know, the pandemic and difficult working environments, and yet they've continued to complain about how much work they have. So maybe it's a degree of, you know, underestimating the challenges of COVID. But it's something that we've had to deal with. So that's kind of the experience in a nutshell. There's much more detail that I could go into there. Just sort of one more thing I want to say. If you are interested in the Classmates software and you happen to be in a place where you might be able to test it, I'm looking to be running pilot studies. So this is a little plug, but please do get in contact with me if you're interested in trying out that software and trying your own version of kind of lab-like sessions with Classmates. I'd really love to speak to you. Yeah, so I think that is all for now. I'll hand back to Marco.
Okay, thank you, Simon. What I'll don't disappear yet, because now is a chance for people to ask you questions. So I'm going to, so if anybody any of the audience would like to ask Simon some particular questions, and we may have some time for general discussion later, but please do. I see one's come in, but maybe I'll sort of fire off with the first question. So what do you think you've learned from this year that could potentially carry on to after COVID, when, you know, this mythical time when everything will be back to normal? You know, will everything go back to what it was before, or do we think we've learned things that you know, will continue to be useful and important?
I really hope that we won't go back to an exact replication of what we did before. I think there were many things wrong with that mode of teaching, many frustrations, I would say, so you know, when I think about some of the advantages that we've got, the ability, the flexibility of online teaching means that we can, for example, I now run an advanced JavaScript class that's completely off curriculum, but I knew that many students wanted to learn these advanced skills, but which we could never cover in lectures because we would lose a large portion of the class. And that runs across year groups. And it was very easy to put together a timetable, and that's the sort of thing that would never happen if we were running on campus, just because timetabling would be much harder. The other things I would say is that I think that the online environment has focused our teaching a lot more on, in some ways, on what's important, on interacting, engaging students, getting them to do active learning. And I hope that carries over into our campus-based teaching. So I hope that many more staff are using things like polling software, trying to design activities into their classrooms, and not just taking it for granted that being there in person is enough. Yeah, so I mean, there are probably many more things there that I could say. I mean, the other thing I would say is the open book exams. I think this is a huge improvement on the type of exams that we used to run. I think it's got more parallels within the working world, to have a challenge where you can research, you can use the internet, you've just got a limited amount of time to find out everything that you need to answer the questions. Yeah, so those are some things. I can see quite a lot in the Q&A.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can.
I think they need publishing. I think they need publishing, or else other people can't see.
I'll read them out, Simon. So maybe.
Okay, all right. I want you to do that.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions from Andrew Otto at the University of Passau, who's asking if you could contrast the silent students in team sessions to traditional tutorials. Like, I suppose what he's saying is, aren't students quiet in tutorials anyway? Okay. And Marie also asks, which is similar, how could you encourage, and do you any ways of encouraging silent breakout rooms?
Okay, so yes, I absolutely agree. I certainly remember running lectures where the majority of my class would not put their hands up. My usual techniques then, I don't know, I'm sure there's many academics here who have tricks up their sleeve. My usual ones was peer instruction. So I would discuss this with your neighbor. And my experience then was, when I used discuss this with your neighbor, the room would erupt into conversation. What they were talking about, I'm not always sure, but they would definitely talk. And the other thing I would do within those sections would be that I would run around the lecture theatre, engaging people in conversation, finding out what they're talking about. So yes, that's probably the difference, is that we had those tricks up of our sleeves. Also, you know, there's the key thing that we could see the students, so we could see their reactions. So one of the techniques that I have now is asking students very, very simple questions to put in the chat. So, you know, starting with, can you hear me, and type yes or no, or have you started the assignment, type started if you've started it, type not started if you haven't. And, you know, and going on from that, and at least encouraging them into interaction, rewarding people who do type things in the chat. Generally, I found that they're not keen to put their microphones on. I don't understand entirely why that is more conspicuous than in a live room where they were more willing to talk. So I guess just something about the medium I don't know. In terms of breakout rooms, I don't yet have any great techniques. We've only just got the breakout room feature in Teams. So I started using this this term and found that the students were silent. When I asked them, they said it's because we don't know each other. So that's an interesting thing. How do we get them to break the ice with each other? How do we get them more confident to speak in these rooms? I think they've lost a lot of confidence in this time.
So maybe, you know, maybe starting with like icebreaker activities, or, you know, simple, you know, tell us about your first pet kind of activities. We've had another comment from an anonymous person who's saying that, you know, we should have to be too careful that, you know, there are introverts and extroverts. Well, I'll read it out. We've been discussing engagement and what that looks like, particularly with regards to extroverts and introverts. Just because someone is silent does not necessarily mean they're not engaged, and if we measure engagement solely on how people interact online, then we're not getting the whole picture. So, you know,
I absolutely agree. In fact, there was a podcast recently I listened to that was talking exactly around this issue of engagement, and can we have more sophisticated measures of engagement, because engaging students aren't always making lots of noise. So I absolutely agree. We need some of those measures. At the moment, what we're doing, you know, is, are they showing up? Are they how are they performing in their micro marks as well? So there's quite a few things. I would say that it's nevertheless, whether students are introspective, introverts or extroverts, I do think as teachers we do need to be pretty proactive. So we need to find ways of, when we don't hear anything from a student, at least checking in with them and saying what's going on. Sometimes they need that in order to that prompt in order to tell us.
Okay, I'm going to read I'll combine another couple of questions. Caroline Ricks, who knows from Goldsmiths.
Hi, Caroline.
Do you think the complaints about workload could be due to the additional visibility of materials and work to complete through having everything online? And Gwyneth, who I believe is Gwyneth from CDE, might the students reporting a high workload be a positive thing, that they're less able to hide and can be more motivated? I was certainly chatting to someone, Mick Grierson, who Simon knows well, who thinks that students have been working harder this term because they have less to do.
Okay, so much to talk about there. With the first suggestion, that may well apply to some subject areas, but we were so digital in the way that we presented our assignment and content before lockdown, but I don't think that could be the thing with our students. It might just be, as you said, Marco, that they are indeed working harder. Anecdotally, I've noticed the quality of the work go up. Yes, I suspect that they're now working harder. They're taking the assignments more seriously, and therefore that means they're spending much more time doing them. But I think it might be an issue around anxiety as well. I think there's a lot of anxiety there, and that's maybe just feeling like the workload is just another thing on top of that. It's hard to unpick.
Okay, thanks, Simon. James is asking about running any hybrid synchronous classes that are for students in class or those online. A multimodal blended approach could be a can of worms, but could be a future model. So yes, this is we have, haven't we? So
yes, we certainly have. Sorry, I completely, because now we're in a fully online state, I forgot to really talk about the attempts at hybrid teaching. I can talk how I found it personally and what other staff have said. I found it very, very difficult. I was constantly torn between the campus students who needed one mode of teaching and the online students who needed another mode. I only have two eyes in my head. And I felt that maybe it needed longer, but eventually we got locked down and were unable to do it anyway. But I felt that it wasn't really. I felt my teaching was poorer for it. So I prefer to either be in a physical space or in an online space. I found that trying to do both at the same time, I didn't really see that there was much advantage.
Okay, maybe I'll take a last set of questions about classmates because we've got some interest there, and then move on.
Yeah.
A bunch of you. Is classmates only suitable for lab sessions, or do you think it could be used as drop-ins for other types of advice? I mean, I can actually say this, yes, from myself, because I've used it for other purposes. Do you use a Microsoft Office system, Power Automate app? I know the answer is no, but maybe Simon will talk a little bit about what he does use. I think those are the only two about classmates. Do you want to sort of talk a little bit about those two?
Yeah, I mean, what I should say, I think what might work better is if I publish some of these questions and then I can answer them via text later on. So I'll just more broadly just talk about what I'm doing with it next. I'm actually doing a project with the CDE, investigating ways of measuring the success of social learning using the app. So I'm planning on adding quite a few extra features to the app to get students to form their own learning groups and kind of form them dynamically around the problems that they have. And I'm hoping that that will give them impetus to talk to each other and be a kind of more constructive way of doing social learning than just breaking them randomly into breakout rooms. So that's the project that I'm doing. I'm looking for people who are interested in piloting and being part of that research. I'll answer the more kind of specific technical questions in the Q&A. But if you are interested, please do email me. I'd love to talk to you, and I'll kind of get back to you that way as well. Okay. Should I hand over?
Yeah, Mark, could you put me up? And I've got my screen shared. So yeah, I think Simon, if you look at the questions offline, and then we can. If there's any other questions, we can come back to them at the end.
Lovely, thank you, Marco. Thank you for having me.
Okay, am I Mark? Am I visible?
Yep, and your screen shared.
Okay. Okay, great, fantastic. So thanks a lot, Simon. Unfortunately, very sorry about this. We've had lots of technical problems today, and Whitney Kilgore has not been able to join the meeting. I think this is another reflection of what we've been having this year, is that we're using a lot of new tools, a lot of problems crossing institutional barriers. So, I think that was what the issue is, that we have our own Teams instance. So I think this has been very characteristic, but hopefully these are some of the things that will iron themselves out, and that this is simply what happens when you're when you're sort of forced into new tools very quickly. What I'd like to talk about today is a bit our history of distance learning. So if you can see my screen, these are 4 examples of videos, including myself, that we've been using within our fully online programs. These are mostly from our BSc in computer science and our MSc in data science with University of London worldwide. So these are global programs. They're 100% online, 100% asynchronous. So the idea is, and we've been running distance learning programs with Goldsmiths and University of London for 20 to 30 years. And we've been running these programs much more recently in the last couple of years, but we had a lot of experience prior to COVID of creating very high quality online learning experiences. And I'm going to talk a little bit about video because that's one of the most prominent things, and then the experience in general. But for this, what we found for our online programs is that, it's all pre-recorded. It's all pre-recorded to a very high standard in professional studios. Actually, COVID did hit this because we're no longer able to go into our studios and work with our professional film crews. So we were having to self-film a lot more. But, there was a very high quality, short 5 to 15-minute videos on key topics, so that you're not sort of trying to replicate the 1 hour lecture. And these are interspersed very much with activities. So, sort of very much active learning and, getting used to stepping away from the traditional lecture, here I am droning on model. And as I said, high quality studio production, particularly sound quality, is vital in learning. And, we've had talking heads, sort of talking lectures, but, high quality visuals, often by professional motion graphics people. And this created, an excellent learning experience. And, I suppose in March 2020, I came in thinking, I really now know the secret to online learning and, what makes great online learning. But actually, I want to reflect on a little bit, what differences, as many of us have come from a campus learning, in-person learning environment, and that's I teach on campus a lot, and having to take that online. But actually, I want to reflect on my experiences as somebody with a lot of experience of 100% online learning, and then coming to use those experiences for delivering online learning to on-campus students. And I think really what I want to focus on is the difference between the two types of student. So if we think about an on-campus student, this will be the student many of us are familiar with. To take a stereotype, they're young, coming, fairly directly from school, late teens, early 20s. They're studying full time. They're away from home. Their home is their family, parents' home, and they're away from it for maybe for the first time. And, they're in the same city, and, before last year, they were in the same room as each other. So, they're geographically close. This is a stereotype. This doesn't apply to all on-campus students by any means. But maybe that's, in some ways, I want to pick that up because in some ways, this is our learning model is designed for students who fit these features. And in fact, that many of what we've seen this year may be able to sort of accommodate the fact that actually a lot of our students aren't like this at all anymore. But I wanted to contrast this very much with the distance learning students that we have, and this is based on the demographic surveys we've done for our BSc in computer science. So the average age is over 30. Most of them are in full-time work as well as studying or very substantial part-time work. Many have family commitments. So, being in their 30s, many will have parents. There will be, they're not a single person away from home, potentially still coming out from the care of their parents. They are parents themselves. They're often presumably married and have all of these standard commitments, but also in a sense support networks. And they're global, so they have multiple time zones. They're so essentially, for a large course like BSc computer science, you can assume that you've got a student in every single time zone in the world. And what this means is that, a distance learning student, what they're really looking for is flexibility. So, they don't want to be told, oh, you have to come to a lecture at 2 p.m. because that's London 2 p.m. They could be in New Zealand and that's the middle of the night, or they could be in London, but hey, 2 p.m. is the middle of my working day, or I have to pick up my kids at 3 p.m. and I won't be able to attend the lecture at 2 p.m. So, they really need a flexible learning model that fits into their own time. And this is one of the strong arguments for asynchronous learning. I'll come back to that in a minute. But if you look at the on-campus student, actually there's a really important need for social connection. And Simon's mentioned this. They're away from their traditional social support structures. They're young, they're looking for new social experiences. And particularly this has been thrown up by COVID and lockdown, is that our campus students really seek social connection with other students, and this really affects the teaching model. So as I said, I came in with a very asynchronous model, and this is a lot of important benefits. It's flexible, so it can be done in any time and any place. You're not restricting students' timing at all. I think it can be a very good learning experience. So the 1 or 2 hour lecture of someone like me standing at the front droning on for long periods of time, that isn't an optimal learning experience. That's what we expect, but it's not a gold standard. It's it isn't. It's a very passive form of learning. It's very it's very it's very dull. It doesn't fit well with our our attention spans, whereas a sort of shorter bunches interspersed with activities can be a much better learning experience. It's possible to rewatch, so there's no there's not a lecture that's here today and gone tomorrow. It's very you can go back to it many times, and and I've recorded my live lectures, and I'm very aware that students are watching the difficult bits many times and probably fast forwarding through the boring bits. And it's very robust to bandwidth. So in the situation we're having now, this is a live session. If anyone's bandwidth drops, you've lost that bit of conversation. And a lot of students don't have good bandwidth, particularly globally, but even in London, they don't have great broadband. So they can download or buffer the videos or watch them again at a time when their network comes up again. Also, it's robust to technical issues. We've had serious technical issues today. If everything's pre-recorded and up online, you don't get that so much. But there are, my first sense is like Synchronous is the best for learning, and I think there are strong arguments for it being a really great way of delivering what would traditionally have been delivered in a lecture. But Synchronous does provide a sense of togetherness, so everybody's there, even if you can't see their cameras. There's a sense of being there with other people, which I think can be quite important for students. When they're under stress, they're in difficult situations and feeling isolated. There's a sense of a more direct connection with the lecturer, and with some interaction, you can ask questions. But I think really most importantly, what's come out in this last few months is the importance of peer-to-peer interaction. So I really, students are really missing seeing each other. Campus students who are now online are really missing seeing each other. I think some of the distance learning students are very happy just getting on with it. They've got their families, they've got their support models. They're fine. I just want to study. I don't want to talk to people. There are others who are very sociable, but some are just fine getting on and studying. But I think for on-campus students, given their situation, there's much more demand for peer-to-peer. And I just wanted to mention breakout rooms, something we've discussed. There are issues here that we talked about, and I think that it's important to use these as encourage a certain social element beyond just the work elements. So thinking about bringing something of yourself. I teach virtual reality. Like, what's your favorite VR experience? I thought group work would be terrible this year, and it's always difficult. Students always hate it, but I think actually I've now increased the amount of group work because it's a way of students seeing each other and interacting with each other, even though there are problems. And also, I think one thing that Microsoft Teams does provide is persistent chat, which can be quite a nice way of students having a sort of low-level interaction with each other. So, but what I will say is that I'll just remember that a lot of students do not our campus students don't fit that stereotypical view of what a campus student is. They are older, they are working. And so actually this move to online and the move to a bit more asynchrony can really help those non-traditional types of students. Anyway, I've talked for a long time after talking about how lecturers drone on, so maybe we can take a few questions. Oh wow, there's a lot of questions in the published element there. I don't know, Simon, you've probably handled a few of those. Or somebody's talking about Miro boards. I really like Miro boards and Padlets. Yes, there are lots of. Actually, that's one thing I will say is that it's good to have breakout rooms together with some sort of audience response tool. So I've used WooClap, which Simon mentions, where students are working together and then post something back to the whole class, and then I will read out some of their responses. So it's quite a big class. I can't pull out everybody to say something, but we can definitely use some of these collaborative tools to sort of feed activity from breakout rooms back into the main class. Ash, what are your views on recording lectures versus not? I have to say I am pro recording lectures, very much so. I know they may pay slightly less attention, but I really feel the ability to revisit a lecture is super important. I think sort of this, and yes, it's important to take notes in some way, but actually that can be quite distracting from the lecture itself. So I think I'm very pro recording lectures, and I teach really quite technical subjects, and my students do need to get back, and they're not going to be able to understand it the first time round. Talking about making it compulsory to switch on videos. Yes, I wouldn't make it compulsory. I think that can be quite invasive, and I think it's I encourage students to open up their cameras in breakout rooms, but not necessarily in lectures. So lots of discussion. It seems like breakout rooms to produce using OneDrive. So breakout rooms combined with co-working activities. I think that's really great. The audio here is tiring. We're not using mics. I am actually using a mic, but yes, good audio. And apologies if our audio hasn't been very good. David Baum from the CD's asking about student interactions outside of formal structures of the course. Yes, I think I'm always interested in this. And I think it's very important that there's the bit of chatting at the end of the at the back of the class or outside of the corridor that is not overseen by us. And ultimately, that has to be a bit of dark matter. I think it has to be private. So unless anyone's picked up any final questions, I think we're very near the end, so I might wrap up. If somebody's picked up some important questions, maybe they can indicate them to me. But I think, thank you very much. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I'd like to say one last thing, which is the next webinar is on the 4th of February, again 2 till 3 p.m. And it is what will digital assessment look like this year? So, we've been talking a lot about the teaching elements, but assessment is vital to learning. And I think it's, there's a lot of innovation has happened. So I think, you know, that will be another very interesting webinar. So in the meantime, I would like to very much thank Simon for talking. I would also like to thank Linda and Whitney, who weren't able to join, and for their efforts. And Linda and Mark Beasley from the CD have done an enormous amount to prepare for this webinar. And I'd also like to thank Mark Anderson and Will Goodin, who've been working behind the scenes, and Kate Geller to make this happen. So I think I'm going to end the webinar now, but I'll sort of continue to sort of ask questions in chat. Unless you have any final comments, Simon, would you like to?
No, but thanks very much for hosting the webinar and inviting me to speak. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Simon. And so I'm going to finish now, and I'll try and reply to a few questions in the chat. Do people get responses in the chat? I hope so. I'll try anyway. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.